This podcast is a proud member of the UUOP network.
This is episode 642 of the unofficial Universal Orlando podcast for December 17th, 2024. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Pulling the curtain back, this is one we are recording ahead of time, so I have no Tracy, I have no Chris, I have no Michelle, but I do have a very special guest. And before we introduce that guest...
UUOP is brought to you by the Producers Club. Join today and get bonus episodes, chance to be guest host, be part of our awesome Facebook community, and more. Head over to uUOP.supercast.com to subscribe. Shameless plug.
I like having Chris on the show, even when he's not on the show. It's nice, he can answer back as well, which is cool. Yes, as I alluded to, we have a very special guest who I've been trying to plan this for quite a while, actually, and that is good friend of the show, Miss Kirsty Clyne. Hi, Kirsty.
Hi, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thank you. Glad to be here.
Excited to talk about something that we don't talk about, and not a lot of people kind of probably even think about when they go to the parks. But before we get into that, I kind of want to get to know a little bit about you, because I know you're a big Universal fan, but what is your history with Universal Orlando? And again, alluding to what we're going to be talking about, why did that make you want to go and work there?
So I think the first time I went to Universal Orlando, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. It was back in 2007. So quite a while ago. It was something that I don't remember too much about from that trip, but then my parents loved it so much that we went back every 1.5, 2 years. So it's always been a kind of a big part of my childhood growing up, especially for me. I think about Orlando, I've always kind of thought about Universal. It's kind of been ingrained into me since a young age. And it kind of gave me that motivation to experience kind of being out there in a longer capacity. So that was why I really wanted to work there, to kind of meet the team members that had made memories for me and kind of be able to pass that opportunity and make memories for, I guess, other kind of guests and visitors to Universal.
That's a huge thing. We talk about that a lot on the podcast of the theme parks are amazing, but a lot of those memories that you make going out there will be those interactions with team members. It's massive.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you speak to anyone who's worked there or even visited there, you know, people will have at least one memory with a team member that they can remember that really made an impression on them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cool. So what is it about Universal? Because we talked offline a little bit about Disney as well. What is it about Universal Orlando specifically? Universal
is... So I am also a really big thrill seeker. So the rides, obviously, that's one side of it. Things like Velocicoaster, Hagrid's. I think the Hulk was maybe like my first kind of inverted roller coaster ever.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So that's always been like a huge part.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but then even like just the whole overall experience, like I'm a massive fan of the Grinch, for example. So being able to, yeah, I love him.
Oh, you and Tracy. If Tracy was here, she would be like, yo, you're my girl.
Yeah, honestly, I was like strangely obsessed with the Grinch when I was younger. Like I would ask to watch it all the time, even when it wasn't Christmas. Like my parents got fed up hearing the words the Grinch in our house. But yeah. Big Harry Potter fan growing up as well. So I think there's just been a lot more kind of emotional connections with Universal for me. A lot more kind of attachment, even to like the original things. I loved the Sinbad show when I was growing up. It's one of my favourite things to go do. Same for Poseidon's Fury. So it's always just had fond memories with Universal, with all the attractions, past and present. So
yeah, I think it's that different. It's starting to build a little bit now, but a lot of that connection that people have with Disney World is nostalgia, whereas Universal doesn't necessarily, or didn't necessarily have that, where they were on the sort of cutting edge of popular culture, and now you're starting to see that with people discovering Universal more and more, that nostalgia for the parks is definitely becoming a bigger thing among fans, for definite.
Oh, 100%. I think it's always been a part of the holiday when we've gone to Orlando when I was younger, where Universal was the more kind of, not relaxed as per se, because obviously you're still quite busy doing things, but it was the more easygoing side.
Yes.
It's always been a bit more kind of chill, a bit more easy to just decide what you want to do on the day whenever you feel like it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge draw as well.
I think that's still true now. I think it's changing ever so slightly, and I think it's definitely going to change next year for at least at one of the parks for definite. But yeah, I think you look at how, again, we talked about it before we started recording, how much of a chore going to Disney is. I think I've said it on the show before when we did Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party. It was exciting, but I found it crazy that we had to set an alarm at 5 to 7 to then stand to the side, pull our phones out, get on the Disney app to try and get a virtual line for Tron.
Yes,
And that's not something you ever have to do at Universal. If you're worried about crowds, worst case, you buy an express pass. There's no picking a time. You literally just walk up to the front of the ride, down a separate line, and you're in. And it is exactly that. It is easier.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I feel like with things like Velocicoaster and Hagrid's, when they first opened, if you wanted to queue for them 6 times in a day, if the wait permitted it, you could do that. And that's what I have always loved about Universal, is you can go on one ride as many times as you physically can in that day, and there's no really restrictions on that.
Yeah,
so.
Like you look at Rise of the Resistance and Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember we had Jeremy on from Main Street Magic, and he was talking about the first time he took, I think it was his brother or whatever, on Guardians of the Galaxy, and they got the virtual line for it, and they're like, "Oh, that was amazing! Can we go on it again?" And Jeremy was like, "No." And it's like, "What?
Yeah.
What?"
Yeah,
like, it's just weird.
Yeah, it's a shame. Like when I first went on Guardians, I was the same. I was like, "Oh, I really want to do that again." I was like, "But I'll wait for another day to get another virtual queue, or boarding kind of group."
It's crazy.
Like, oh.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I hope Universal, we kind of expected them to bring that in with Epic, and it doesn't look like they are, which is interesting. I guess we'll see how that goes. I wouldn't have liked to have been sat on those logistics conversations of how do we manage this park, because it's going to be, let's use the word interesting.
Yeah, hats off to them. I think I'd be too stressed to be on a team like that.
Yeah, it's difficult because the theme park world has changed so much in the last 20 years, and opening the newest theme park in Orlando since, what was the last park that opened? Islands of Adventure back in 1999?
Yeah, my goodness.
So to try and manage something that you haven't done in 26 years is, a headache. And the problem is that if it doesn't go smoothly, the whole world's going to know about it.
Oh yeah, social media is the first place to scrutinize anything with theme parks nowadays.
Yeah.
So I do hope it goes well for them. I really do. Save them the wrath.
Yeah, it happened a little bit with Volcano Bay when that opened. That
Yes.
didn't open smoothly, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, it's a mess! Don't go."
Yeah,
And it's
which
like-
I think is crazy. Like, with these things, when they do open, you will be expecting there to be small hiccups and things. Nothing's going to run 100% smoothly as soon as it does.
People have a sense of entitlement now, though, don't they? It's like, if I've paid full price to get in, I expect to get a full price experience. I shouldn't be paying for those smoothing out the kinks days. It's that argument I know when Michelle did Premium Scream at Horror Nights this year. We were kind of like down on it because you're effectively charging people a premium for a full dress rehearsal.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
And she said it's the best night at Halloween Horror Nights she has ever had, ever in the history of ever. So apparently it worked well. But anyway, yes, you decided you wanted to work there. And I mean,
Yes,
who wouldn't? It would be interesting. So to let people know, when and where did you actually get to work while you were there?
Yes, I actually worked there for 2 different kind of periods. I worked there in summer 2019, probably from the start of June till about the start of September. On my first time working there, I worked at Amatista Cookhouse at Sapphire Falls Resort. So the role was a bit interesting. I'll get onto it a little in a second, but because of the program we do, we're not limited to the same kind of traditional roles that necessarily team members are. So we were able to do a bit of a cross-training kind of position. So I worked as a mix between kind of a busser, a food runner, and a host at Amatista, which was a cool role. It was a bit of variation.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff to do. So yeah. And then on my second time, I worked at Portofino Bay Hotel. I worked at the Splendido's Pool Bar and Grill, which is just kind of their pool food outlet. I was a food runner there, which was really fun. I was a bit concerned about kind of being outside working in that Florida heat, but oh my goodness, it was such a good time. I wouldn't necessarily say I enjoyed one more than the other, but Portofino was definitely a lot of fun for sure.
I wonder if at any point you have happened to have served Michelle. Michelle is like, Portofino is her hotel of choice. And to be fair, Sapphire, it's interesting, you've worked at the two hotels as far as us hosts go that are split, because Michelle's a Portofino girl and Tracy, Chris and I are definitely Sapphire Falls. I adore Sapphire Falls.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky that I've now stayed at least for one night at all of the 8 hotels so far. And definitely Sapphire Falls is one of my favourites, hands down. If it had that express pass, oh my goodness, you'd never see me not in there.
Yeah. We're ticking off. We've got 2 left, and we're currently, while this episode comes out, we'll be coming back home from our trip. We'll have ticked off Surfside, so there's only Aventura we haven't stayed at.
Oh, Aventura is one of my favourites, actually.
Really? It's interesting. We did visit there 2 years ago and went up to Bar 17, which is awesome.
Yes, I love Bar 17.
But it's an interesting hotel. It feels very sterile compared to the others. But it's definitely, like, we were always like, I don't want to stay there. It just looks a bit eh. And then having visited there, like, oh no, I'll be up for it.
Yeah, no, I just love like the ease of it all. Like everything's on the iPad in the room. And for someone like my age, like with that whole technology stuff, we just love not having to talk to anyone. So.
Hey, I'm a lot older than you, Kirsty, and to be fair, I don't particularly like talking to people either, to be fair.
It's a shared experience.
Yes, it is. Well, I like talking to people about this when I'm out and about. I will say, I think you need to go back to Amatista, because our shared experience at that restaurant between Michelle and Tracy and I recently has not been great. I think you need to go over there and retrain some of their staff. Sorry if you work there, but it hasn't been great lately.
It's funny you say that. I actually went to Amatista before I went to Halloween Horror Nights earlier this year, and we actually had a really good experience. Okay. Which I was like, because I hadn't been in so long, so I wasn't sure how it would be. Definitely has changed over the years, though.
Yes,
for sure.
That's something I want to get into later on, because you working 2019 and then 2022 is going to open a very interesting question, because something happened in between those 2 trips that affected the world massively, and I'm interested to see from someone who's worked there's perspective to see how much it did change. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So, obviously, I assume Yummy Jobs is a UK-based company.
Yeah, so Yummy Jobs has offices in the UK, but we also have some now in the US as well.
Okay. So, obviously, you were coming from the UK. How did that process go from, like, I want to go and work there to literally working there? And did that, we'll kind of get into what we've just talked about as well, did that process change pre and post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting kind of my story with Yummy Jobs and how I got in these programs. I had never even known it was a thing until I'd actually found out about the Disney equivalent. So Disney do international programs, for example, and I had applied for one of those. And then I found out through that about the Universal programs. Specifically, at the time, I did the Lowe's Hotels program. And I was so interested in that, and I went for that one, and then I got it. And it was a quick process. I think I was hired onto the program probably at the start of February. We filled out a couple documents with the help of Yummy Jobs, especially like visa documents, getting the J1 summer work and travel visa, which is just a visa that lets university students outside of the US go over and work a couple of different types of roles you can do kind of really anywhere in the US. It doesn't need to be Orlando specific, for example. But that process was really smooth, actually. And then by, I think it must have been the start of May, I went to the US Embassy and got my visa. And then I started in June. It was a process. It was a lot smoother than I'd expected it to be. But yeah, so I headed over there at the start of June in 2019. No idea what to expect. Not a single clue what I could possibly be getting myself into. Obviously, being there on holiday is so different to actually working there. And it was quite a daunting thought that this corporation in my mind that was so massive, so impressive, and then there was little old me coming over from a tiny town in Scotland. I was like, this is so surreal. But, it was a really good kind of settling in process. We had a good week of like orientations with the Lowe's Hotels group. We then had on the job training with dedicated trainers, and then any questions we had throughout the process was kind of settled between the visa sponsors, Yummy Jobs, Lowe's, all of that. Okay. So it was a really smooth, actually, onboarding process, for sure. for the first year.
Yeah, and did that process change much? Obviously, like we alluded to the fact that COVID happened in the middle of that, and I think the whole world has changed. Did that, or was it still the same process at that point, or did it affect the process at all?
There was definitely a couple of different changes. Like, you still had to go to embassy appointments and things like that. But the main big one was kind of obviously vaccination requirements.
Right.
So we had to do, we obviously had to prove we were vaccinated to even get into the US, let alone do the program. But then you also had to do a fit to fly test. And I think that was the kind of interesting part, was that the week before I did my second program, I saw no one. I did not leave my house. I did not want to go see anyone because if I had a positive COVID test, then I obviously couldn't go.
Yeah.
So, but actually when we were on the program, there wasn't too many changes. Most things stayed the same. It was definitely more focused on safety and health and safety for sure. I would say there was a lot more differences in kind of the food safety courses that we had to do that had a lot more things about if you feel sick ever so slightly, obviously don't come in. And there was different, obviously, policies in place if it was COVID and stuff as well. So there wasn't too much change in the day-to-day job. Maybe just a little bit to kind of start in the onboarding.
That's interesting. I've had a complete brain spasm there. I think you would be a great guest for our other podcast, which is The Taste of Universal, with the ladies. I think the ladies would love to talk to you working at two of the food outlets over there, because we have so Kelly is dairy free, Kayla is gluten free, Shelby is vegan. I think that could be an interesting. I'm gonna put you in touch with them. I think that'd be interesting. Yeah, I think you'd fit in really well with them as well. So kind of talk about a bit more. So when you applied, did you apply for a specific role, or did you go out just like, I want to work there, and they give you that role once you got out there, or what? How was that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. So what happens with the programs is they tend to have a couple of different roles, and you just apply for the program. You can kind of put forward that you'd prefer maybe one role or a different role. So for example, my first year, the two different roles were food and beverage or lifeguarding.
Okay.
I am an awful swimmer. I would not want to put anyone's life in my hands. So I was like, I'd really rather food and beverage. And that was what I was then offered. So you find out your kind of what job you'll be doing before you accept the job offer, but you don't find out your actual location until probably just before you get onto the program. So I didn't know I was going to be working at Sapphire Falls until maybe about 2 weeks before. So it was quite cool to find that out. You don't get to choose like your work location either.
Right.
So like you don't find that until you're really there for orientation. So I wasn't sure if I'd be in, Drum Club, which is the pool bar at Sapphire Falls, or Strongwater Tavern, or Amatista. So I found that out when I got there, and I'd never really heard of Amatista. Sapphire Falls, I think it was kind of newer from maybe one of the couple of times I'd been there. So I was like, oh, exciting. And we kind of got a full orientation there, and that was cool, to be fair. But yeah, you find out your location just before you arrive. You find out your position before you sign on to the program.
So I know a question of probably a lot of people who are listening are thinking, because I am. So the program you applied for, was that just at the hotels, or did it include the theme parks and City Walk as well, or not? Yeah,
so the one I applied for was just the hotels.
Right.
Universal ran one where it was the theme parks back in when they opened Harry Potter, Wizarding World in studios back in 2010, 2011.
So we had a friend of ours on Zoe who did that program and went and worked in the Wizarding World when that opened. So yeah, it's interesting you say that.
Yeah, two of my co-workers actually did the same. They were both in food and beverage locations over in Hogsmeade. So it's cool to see that for sure. And then they brought that program back actually last year. So last year was the first year since really kind of around that time frame where people could work in the theme parks again now. So there is a program with Universal directly now where people can work in the theme parks, which is exciting. It's cool to see.
Yeah, but you were quite happy. You were quite happy, obviously, to go and work at the hotels. It wasn't like, oh, I wish I could go and work at the theme parks.
No, I was so excited about it. I'd stayed at the hotels like on our holidays before. So I knew kind of a little bit about them, and I knew it was going to be a good time. So I was excited for the hotels. I was kind of interested to see more on that kind of side of how busy it could be, because in my head, whenever I'd been there with family, we would spend our entire days start to finish in the parks.
Yeah.
So I was like, is there a lot of people that just go to the hotels? And that was cool to learn about as well. was see how different people do things.
Yeah, because that's an interesting thing. It's like we've become on-site people, and I never ever thought I would say that. We always used to stay off-site because it was cheaper, and then we did like we'd maybe do one night at a Royal Pacific or a Hard Rock just to get a couple of days of express passes, and then recently we've stayed nowhere else but on-site, and we've become completely converted at this point. But it does seem like a waste of money because we are those open to close people. And I often wonder that. It's like, how many people are wandering around the hotel at any given time of the day? Like, you've got two of the best theme parks in the world out there. What are you doing lounging around the hotel?
Yeah, I remember it would always be quite quiet at Sapphire Falls, for example, around lunchtime. It was that you'd get a lot of people in for breakfast in the morning before they had their kind of headed off to the park. You'd get some people in for dinner who'd maybe done a full day in the park and kind of wanted to come through and have a nicer meal. But lunch was usually quite quiet, unless it was storming.
Yeah, of course.
If it was storming, we would get very busy very quickly, for sure.
Yeah, we've only been to Amatista once. We came out, when was that, 2 years ago? And as I said, our experience wasn't great. It is somewhere I definitely want to try again. But we've said it on the show a million times. A restaurant's a restaurant. You know, sometimes they have bad days, some days they don't. And it's just, you've got to take it for what it is and not let it put you off. I mean, we go back to our first ever visit to Cowfish, which is, I don't think it's wrong to say that it's probably the worst restaurant experience we've ever had anywhere.
I could understand that. I really love Cowfish. I think their food's incredible. I've had some great experiences there, but I have also had some really poor experiences at Cowfish too.
Yeah, we ended up going back, and it's one of our favourite places on property now. I adore that place. Yeah. It's amazing. But we always, like, if we do a review of a restaurant, it's always like, this was our experience. You could go tomorrow and have the best experience ever. So don't, take ours for what it was and go back. But I know Michelle said she took a big group of her agents out for, this must have been Horror Nights last year, and they had a horrible experience. Service-wise, said the food was good. Service-wise, not great.
Yeah, I think we kind of had this conversation, me and one of my friends recently, is that definitely since kind of, as we obviously talked about earlier, that kind of COVID change, I do feel a lot of places, especially in Orlando as a whole, have kind of gone down in some service aspects. But hopefully, I mean, I've started to see that improve over the past 2 years. So hopefully it'll continue to do so. I know we kind of heard recently that obviously when the parks closed for COVID, a lot of those people got laid off because the restaurants were closed and went and got jobs elsewhere. So that when the theme parks and City Walk opened back up, there were really service positions were really hard to fill. And I think that's had a big say in it. I think definitely. I saw that with my second programme. A lot of the people I worked with had only been with the company since COVID had ended or kind of started to ease off a little bit, which was interesting because in my first programme there'd been people who'd been working there since the hotel had been built or people who'd been with Lowe's for 20, 30 years.
Wow.
And not as many on my second, which was interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to that. I think a lot of people need to work, so they've gone and got jobs elsewhere, and do you know what, I quite like this job and I'm just going to stay here for now. And I think that's what's happened a lot. COVID has a lot to answer. This is the most conversation that I've had about COVID in probably 2 years. It's interesting, is it? But it has affected the theme parks, I think, for definite.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, things like the programs that I did, for example, they couldn't run in 2020 and 2021 because the US embassies weren't able to give visas out to students. They weren't open because of COVID. So there's also a drop of international students coming over and filling positions that are usually filled in peak season too.
Right.
So that was a change, especially I think for the theme park industry on both sides, not just Universal. I think it was felt quite in Orlando as a whole. I mean, a lot of the different places, a lot of the different theme parks do have J1s, and we'll call them J1s, but have international students in some capacity for the summer, and that wasn't really able to happen.
Yeah, this is kind of why I was excited to get you on, because we talk about the hotels, but it's mostly about the theme parks. When people are talking about Universal Orlando, it's the theme parks, but the hotel is the start and end of your vacation, really.
Oh yeah, like the hotel, I think there's something so special about being a team member at the hotel because you won't see a guest necessarily once. You might see them 5 or 6 times throughout their visit. And you really get the chance to make a lot more impactful memories from that For example, we had a family, and I remember it vividly from my first program, where they came in on their first day for breakfast, and they told us they were on a birthday trip, and it was their little girl's birthday
Awesome.
a couple days later. So then they came back in for dinner on the night of the girl's birthday. They didn't even need to tell us. We already knew it.
Awesome.
So we brought them a little minion toy, a little balloons and stuff like that. So yeah, those memories are really cool to make. You can make them a bit more personal when you've seen someone a good couple times too.
Yeah, and that's amazing. Like we always say it on the show, you know, if you're celebrating something, go. Don't expect it, because I think a lot of people go, I think it's been taught over at Disney that you will expect to get a dessert or something or whatever. Don't expect it, but if you get it, it's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many cool things that, you know, Lowe's are able to allow team members to do for people when they're celebrating special events, which was always nice to see too. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
We won't talk about those yet.
Yeah.
I don't want to give people unrealistic expectations, but yeah, like you say, we talked about it, that I think there's only Surfside and Aventura we haven't stayed at, and experience-wise, they've been good. Our experience at Portofino, the last trip, was interesting. We had a very surly guest services manager when we were trying to pick a package up. That was interesting. Other than that, all our stays have been great. I mean, even staying at Dockside, I never thought Tracy's quite a what's the word I want to use that isn't insulting? She likes a little bit of the finer things in life. Not like Michelle, she's not a Helios girl, but we'd heard so many, I don't want to say bad stories, but Dockside and Surfside are what they are. They're the cheap hotels at Universal, and so the walls are a little bit thinner, and it's, you know, we heard all these stories like, oh, it's dead noisy and you'll never get to sleep and the towels are this, that. Do you know what? We love it.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Surfside and Dockside. We stayed at, I think it was Surfside for a full week back in October last year, and I loved every minute of it. I would probably go as far as saying that I would always pick Surfside or Dockside over Cabana Bay. Which is a bold claim to make, but I really would.
I would agree with you on that, to be fair. We've stayed at Cabana Bay twice, only for a night each. And I like Cabana Bay, but I agree with you. I think I would probably pick Surfside and Dockside over Cabana Bay, which is a strange thing to say because I know people who Cabana is their hotel of choice.
Yeah.
But I understand why. But yeah, the only thing that those three hotels lack is that ease of getting to the parks, of like getting the buses and still having to get through the security hub.
Yeah, definitely. I always say to people that Aventura has that added benefit of it's so easy to get the water taxi from Sapphire, but it's a shame that the other ones don't have that ease.
Yeah. So obviously you worked at the hotels and you went through orientation. Did that orientation include the theme parks, or was your focus entirely on the hotels?
No, it did, yeah. I mean, it doesn't go as in-depth as obviously it would if you were working at the theme parks, but you do get kind of a bit of a Universal orientation, talking about the history of Universal, the different rides, and you do kind of get a walkthrough of all the different terminology stuff that Universal uses. It's not as too in-depth as there are obviously people at the hotel you can direct guests to that would be better answer to questions, but it's more focused on kind of the history of Universal and how that relates to the hotels.
Yeah. Because I guess as somebody, if you're a host at a restaurant like you were, or even a food runner, having interactions, like we've said, having interactions with the people you are serving is a huge part of that dining experience. Definitely for us, like we're the type of people that'll have banter with our server, and it just makes the whole thing so much better. And obviously you are at those theme parks, so if you have knowledge, because you had that knowledge probably prior to that anyway, they were probably like, come on, I know all this already, can we just move on please? But having that knowledge will make those interactions with the people you're serving probably much better anyway, because like if they've just come back from the theme parks and they're buzzing about riding Hagrid's or Velocicos or whatever it might be, you go, oh yeah, did you do front row? Have you done it at night? You know, because you understand that part of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the really exciting part about that kind of first program as well was my very first day of actual on the floor kind of work. And in the restaurant, it was the opening of Hagrid's. So we had people asking us if we'd been on Hagrid's, but I'd only really been in the US for like 2 days at that point. And I was like, well, I'm just as excited as you are to kind of get to experience that. So that was cool, kind of being able to experience the opening of something with guests at the same time too.
Especially something in the scale of Hagrid as well.
Oh yeah, I mean it was crazy. That first day, I remember we were obviously working, but people were coming back from the parks for like their kind of afternoon siestas, and they were saying to us, "Oh, there's a 13-hour queue at the park right now for Hagrid's," and we were like, "Oh my goodness!"
Yeah, Michelle was there opening day. She met up with 3 friends, and they queued for 7.5 hours.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, but I mean, it is a great ride, so I do understand it. So.
Yes, I think it's that thing. If you're going down and that's your focus, and I'm just going to do that, like hang out in line, and you get a group of your like friends and stuff together, it could like a huge experience. But just like 7 hours standing in a line.
Oh yeah, I couldn't. Me and my friends have this ongoing joke. When we last went on a holiday together, we were in line for maybe about an hour. I think it was 70 minutes for Velocicoaster. Oof. We got to about the 45-minute mark, and it was the end of the night. We were all tired, and it was like we did not want to speak to each other, and it was the longest 70 minutes of my entire life. Yeah, I don't know why we did it. We were so convinced. We were like, oh, they're just saying 70 because it's the end of the night. It'll be like 20.
We've seen that before.
Why did we think that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Because that's what they do. They will hike the price. They will hike the wait time up to put people off getting in line.
Yes,
We've seen that before, and those wait times.
It happens for Hagrid's a lot. I saw that in my not so much my first program because it would reach capacity a lot of the time. But on my second program, we would go in at the end of the night. It would say 110 minutes, and it would sometimes be like 30 minutes. Yeah, and we were like, oh, lovely.
So here's a question then, going off what you've told me previously. So we saw that the virtual line for the Grinch didn't happen last year, and it doesn't look like it's happening this year. How long would you wait to meet the Grinch? Would you stand 7.5 hours for that?
I had such an incredible experience with the Grinch when we did like one of the Grinchmas VIP tours a couple of years ago, and that was worth its weight in gold. But waiting in a line to see him for a couple of minutes, I don't know. I think I would maybe do 2 hours max. I could not wait longer than that, I would say.
2 hours is still a long time, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It is. I always say to my mum and dad, like, I'm blessed that I'm in a generation where we will just get out our phones and start watching TikToks for 2 hours with no break. But 2 hours for me is probably like an hour for my dad when you look at
that's fair
time
enough.
Comparisons. But
Tracy's not we're not waiting lines people anymore. It's like it's that horrible thing as well where if you go often enough, which we don't go that often, but often enough that we're there. We've been there pretty much every year since 2019, where you get to a point where you don't ride anything because like half an hour, I'm not waiting half an hour for that. We'll just do it next time.
Yeah, there's definitely some rides where I will not wait more than like 15 minutes for nowadays. There's some queues that are so unbearable, I'd say. I'm like, I can't do that. Yeah, there is. I hate that Zeus trolley train ride queue with a passion. Do you actually? I quite like that one. I hate it. It always looks like it needs a bloody good clean. I don't know what it is about it. It always looks dirty. With that. the one that I kind of hate waiting in is Rip Ride Rocket because that little queuing area before you got the stairs can feel really dark just because of the lack of too much cover. But it can feel really dark and it hurts my eyes when I then go up the stairs and kind of see the light. I'm like, oh my goodness. And there's only so many times you can hear Asta before you get sick. Oh, yes, 100%. Cool. Right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors and we'll be right back.
I wish to go to South Korea. Where can our vacation wizards take you? Just tap the port key at portkeyvacations.com and let the magic begin.
Hey everyone, we are back. We are here with Kirsty. I'm really enjoying this. Not that I didn't expect to, but it's interesting to talk to people who work in, and I don't want to say those smaller roles, but it kind of is, but for all it's a smaller role at the parks, it's still so impactful that we've already talked about that. It's massive. And like we've said that I think sometimes those smaller roles are the ones that potentially have the biggest impact sometimes.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would agree. There's sometimes like you'll speak to a guest and they'll tell you about an experience they've had, whether it's at Universal or not, and it's a smaller role that's been maybe a really negative experience or it's been a hugely positive experience. So you really do start to learn, especially with working there, how impactful the roles can be. Even if it's a small impact, it can be really impactful.
Yeah, you can also be one of those people, like if you're working in like you were working in Amatista and a family's been to the parks, and we all know that those days at the theme parks aren't always as magical as you want them to be.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like we saw a number of guests who'd had things go wrong for them, but then that gives you the opportunity to try and make something go right for them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You can be that person that puts that whole day right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was so lovely to be able to do that sometimes as well. Give people a little bit of Universal kind of magic for sure.
Yeah, and it's definitely there. I know Disney is supposed to be the place where magic happens, but Universal definitely has it without a doubt. And I think they don't get enough credit for that.
I would agree. Yeah, there's a lot of times I've been to Universal and a team member has done something and stepped above and beyond without even them needing to.
Yeah.
And it's been very, very nice for sure.
So let's go back to your first time over at Amatista at Sapphire Falls. You've kind of talked about it a little bit, but overall, what did your role entail? Like, how did a normal day working at Universal at Amatista look for Kirsty Clyne?
Yeah, so I had two different kind of typical days that might happen when I was at Amatista. There was days where I would be kind of doing a bussing role. If anyone doesn't know what bussing is, it's essentially cleaning the tables of any plates. Once a guest leaves, you basically clean that table, sanitize it, and then you reset it for the next kind of guests that come in. So it's not as a guest interaction role as necessarily other roles would be, but I still found that I was able to make really good conversations with guests when I came over to get their plates. As soon as someone noticed that I didn't have a kind of standard accent that they were expecting,
yes,
I definitely got some really cool conversations about that. And then I also did hosting. So I would have shifts where I would work at the hosting desk. So I would be seating, I'd be greeting, I'd be assigning guests to their tables, which was a really fun role to have.
Yes.
You're the first person a guest sees when they walk into the hotel. So you really kind of give the first impression of the outlet and first impression of how their rest of their night's going to go, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's arguably, I mean, they're both big roles because bussing the tables is important for people's what they see walking in. If they see a lot of dirty tables with plates and stuff left on it, it gives you a bad impression. Whereas if you're doing it's one of those jobs that people will only notice your job if you're not doing it properly.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was the thing that we found as well, is that if you were working a bussing shift and you saw a dirty table, you would kind of rush to clean it because you didn't want other people to see that, because you wanted people to see that you were doing your job well and keep that restaurant clean. Yeah, for sure.
It's a huge part of it. But then, like you say, that host role is massive because it's literally the first. That the rest of it might be an awful experience, but if you start it off well, then if you start that, so kind of going on the opposite, if you start that experience off with a bad interaction with a guest, the rest of it's always going to feel a little weird. So you are literally setting the tone for that whole couple or family or whatever it might be, their whole experience at that restaurant.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, sometimes you are doing a little bit of mediation before they even reach the table. You know, if someone's had to wait a long time for the table, or they maybe thought they made a booking and they hadn't, you're the kind of person that mediates and deals with that rather than the server. And it takes that off the server's plate too. So we always say it was a good role. It was an emotionally challenging role at times, but it was very rewarding too.
I'm going to dig into that. Why was it an emotionally challenging role?
Tensions can get high if people have to wait for tables. You can tell someone a wait is 40 minutes, they'll say yes. They'll come over 10 minutes later and ask why their table's not ready. And I think when you have families that have spent a full day at a theme park, their kids are hungry, they're hungry, they just want to go up and get some food and go to bed, but that they're waiting for this table, there's nothing you can do for them if there's no tables available. And that can be challenging because some people take that well, some people say it is what it is and accept that. Some people, again, have that kind of entitlement that we spoke about earlier, where they're paying to stay at the hotel. What do you mean there's not a table available for them? So it could be, you could get people who are very vocal about their displeasure with that, but you also got people who are really lovely about it. So it could be a roller coaster in one night for sure sometimes.
put a pin in that little bit there, Kirsty, and just let's bring that up when we go in the bonus episode, because I want to dig into that a little bit more. But I don't want to offend our entire audience at this point. I just want to offend a few of them. So obviously, yeah, moving on to 2022, where you worked over at Portofino Bay at Splendido. Again, a very different experience because it's a pool bar. But how different was that comparing it to Sapphire, and then also comparing it to, like, the world had changed at that point? We've already talked about it. So, like, how much of an impact did you notice on your job in 2022 differ from that in 2019 because of what had happened in between?
There was definitely a higher level of standard expected, because people had obviously had more time to save money, and then they'd spent more on this kind of return first trip back since COVID. So we found that guests maybe were expecting a bit more than, well, I found that guests would maybe expect more on my kind of second program than they did in the first program, even with it being a pool bar rather than a kind of full service restaurant. It wasn't too bad of a change for me. Most people, again, were just really happy to be back, to be able to be there on holiday.
Yeah.
Especially if they were an international guest, if they were outside the US. It really was the first time they could have came back to Universal since the pandemic. So that was interesting. You'd have a lot of people who had a lot of mixed emotions. They'd be either really kind of, I don't know the word for it. They'd be really expecting a massive kind of deal made of things, because obviously they've spent all this money on this holiday. It's their first trip back, which is fair enough. Or they would just be so overly grateful to be there. So it was a cool experience. It was definitely different than the first one. The guests were definitely different. I think that also comes with working at a different hotel too.
Yes.
Of course, they're going to be slightly different as well. The pool bar itself compared to Amatista was worlds apart. The role itself was really, really different. I loved both roles. The food runner role is very demanding, especially in that Orlando heat in summer. Especially coming from a country where it never has sun here. That was a big challenge at first. Amatista's obviously fully inside, so my first program, I had that air conditioning. Very rarely was I outside unless it was like to clean the patio or take people to the patio. So working in a predominantly outside location was a big change. But people are a lot more casual at the pool.
Yes.
People are a lot more chill. There's good music playing. Everyone's there to have a good time. No one's expecting their food service to come out fast and snappy and quick.
Okay.
I mean, obviously there's service standards that we'd meet anyway, but people are a bit more lenient, I'd say. They're a bit more chilled out. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit there as well, with like Sapphire is on the lower end of the on-site hotel scale, and at this point Portofino is like the tippy top. I mean, we stayed there 2 years ago, and it wasn't quite for us. I mean, it is a stunning hotel, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't quite for us. So I did wonder whether, because people are paying a lot more to be there compared to even the Hard Rock and Royal Pacific, to be fair, whether that would change people's expectations of you, but it doesn't sound like it did.
No, you definitely do find that there's a lot more people who'll do things in the hotel. So it was definitely busier. The pool was very busy most days that I worked there in the summer. There were some days where there was no pool chairs and stuff available to people because it was just so much busier. Because people were obviously paying that premium to stay in a hotel, so they really wanted to get the most of their money from the hotel. But yeah, no, there was actually, Portofino's quite interesting because there's 3 different pools, but only 2 of them have kind of service provided to them. So there's the main pool where there's the bar, but there's also the quieter pool, which is called the Villa Pool. It's typically really only aimed towards adults, but I think kids are able to go in there as long as they're not running around and stuff. And those two, they were different experiences as well. People were expecting their food to be delivered a lot more kind of formally in the Villa Pool necessarily than maybe in the normal pool. Because
that feels a bit more upscale, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Like it has, I can never pronounce it, but that's the one that has like you ever played like the bowls, like the bokeh kind of bowl thing? They have those there as well. So it's a little bit more kind of sophisticated is maybe the word I'd use.
Authentic.
Yes,
Let's use
for
that
sure.
word. It's funny because it shows you, again, I've said to you that Tracy and I aren't hotel people, that we stayed there for 5 nights and I have no idea where the pools, we didn't see any of the pools at that hotel. We have no idea where they even are.
Yeah, it's really actually quite tucked away. Like the first couple of weeks that I was working there, if I had to leave, I knew how to get it. I knew how to get to the pool very easily from the team member corridors. But if you put me in the kind of public guest-facing area and told me to find the pool, I was so confused. The navigation, it's so hard to navigate Portofino, which is so amusing because it's not really that massive an area.
It feels it. Because like our experience of Portofino is mainly just the piazza. Because our room was looking out over, at the time it was the Christmas tree was up. So we were looking out over the Christmas tree. And then other than going downstairs into the main lobby, and I think I wandered down a corridor and found some escalators down into somewhere. I didn't know where the hell it went. That was about as much of the hotel that we saw. I mean, funny story. We've told this on the podcast before, Kirsty. When we were staying, so that trip we did one night at Cabana Bay in a Volcano Bay view room. Then we moved on to Sapphire Falls for 3 nights, and then did our last 5 nights at Portofino. And we Ubered from Sapphire Falls to Portofino. And as our Uber driver, because you come off that main road and then sweep round that top end of the lagoon, our Uber driver nearly crashed because he was not expecting that view of the hotel. It was hilarious. But it's Universal know how to show something off. And that, I think that hotel is a prime example of that.
Oh, massively. Like Portofino is truly, it's undergoing a lot of construction, but when it's not, it is really gorgeous to look at, especially at night when they light up the kind of boats, when that piazza's all lit up. Oh, it can be gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. I know Michelle, again, Mrs. 1%er, went to Portofino, the actual Portofino, a couple of years ago, and she said when she goes back to Universal, it feels like she's back in Italy.
Oh yeah, we had in our staff changing room, we had a massive kind of painting of Portofino, and on my first couple of days there I actually thought it was just a painting of the hotel. And it wasn't until my manager was like, no, that's an actual Portofino, Italy, and I was like, oh my goodness.
Wow, yeah, it is stunning.
Yeah, like you hear all of the backstory about when you work there, especially about like how Steven Spielberg kind of inspired it.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that. So They basically asked Steven Spielberg if he had any ideas for a hotel, and he said, hey, have you thought about making one about Portofino in Italy?
Interesting.
And that's how the idea kind of came around.
That's the one thing I love about the Universal hotels over Disney, that the themes that they pick for them are timeless.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Even looking at the Stella Nova and Terra Luna, did I get them right? Is that right? Terra Luna and Stella Nova, yes.
Yes.
And Helios, like they are going to stand the test of time. They're not going to date. I mean, that Helios looks amazing.
Yeah, my parents have booked to stay in it. I'm hoping I can crash with them in the summer, so we'll see.
You'll go and you're like, I want to work at this hotel next time.
I'll be like, this is the goal.
Yeah, so we obviously talked about your time there. You spent like 6 or 7 months in total working over there. Is that right, Kirsty?
Yeah, it was about 3.5 months each time, so about 7 months. Yeah.
So one of the things that I worried about starting this podcast, so we started the podcast in 2011 and we didn't go back to the parks till 2013, and it was one of those things that I was worried that, having spoken to people who've worked on the parks and knowing a bit more of the inner workings of things, that it would ruin that magic a little bit. And it didn't. Spoilers, it didn't at all. It just enhanced it completely. I wondered if you felt similar, or whether you were like, now I kind of know the inner workings, it has took the shine off it a little bit. It doesn't sound like it has, if I'm honest.
No, there's there's probably 1 or 2 things I can think of that I used to be amazed at the hotels that I'm now just like, oh, okay. But for the most part, yeah, it really hasn't taken that shine away from me. In fact, it's almost given me a new appreciation for a lot of the stuff that happens behind the scenes, especially. I always thought, like, oh, it's like when someone's preparing something like nachos, I'm like, oh, it's just a nacho. But when you see all the different steps that have to go into it, it actually gives me an appreciation for things such as that. So things I took for granted, I definitely look for now with a newer look. And then there's a couple of things, really small things, just like you'll walk through a corridor and you'll maybe see a door, in my head, I'm like, oh, I know what's behind that door. I know what it looks like. There's nothing compared to what I'm seeing in front of me right now.
Yeah.
So that there's some immersion that does get taken away a tiny aspect, but I'm still able to find that kind of magic and enjoy Universal as it is. So.
It's probably made you appreciate the people that work there more. Like, a lot of people who work in theme parks get taken for granted by guests because you're there to do your job to make my day better and and are just there. Whereas now, like, we appreciate them. We talk about it on the show a lot. Like I've said to you, it's like we know how much of your experience of going to Universal is down to those team members. And now you've been on that side of it, you'll probably appreciate it 100% more.
Yeah, massively. Like, especially, I think I mentioned it slightly earlier, when it gets to points of the day when it's raining, for example, when it's those kind of thunderstorms, it can be really stressful for team members, especially who work in food outlets, who have people piling in the door a lot quicker than they're leaving. And that's given me a new appreciation for things like that. Like, if it's raining, I do expect longer waits for some things if there's a buzzer crowd. So
yeah, I'd never considered that, actually. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it was interesting for sure. We sometimes, I remember in Sapphire Falls, it would sometimes get so busy at Ametista when it rained that we would actually have to ask the team over at Drum Club when the pool was shut if they would come help us food run sometimes. It only happened maybe once or twice in the summer that I worked there. But again, it kind of shows you how the things can really change so quickly as soon as that rain starts.
And let's be honest, when you're getting into those summer months, it's going to happen every day.
Yeah, especially towards kind of the August time. I think working at the pool, we were always having moments where we'd look outside, you'd kind of get used to the clouds. You'd stand outside, look up, and you'd say, yeah, we're going to have a cold, we called them cold whites.
Right.
So you'll have a cold white in about 10 minutes, which is like a lightning storm.
You get a bit of a break working at Splendido. So that's the opposite, I guess, from working at Ametista. When it rains, you knew you were getting busy, and then when you were working at Splendido, you get a bit of a break.
Yeah, it was great, actually. We still had to do, obviously, our basic food prep tasks and stuff. But once they were done, you did get kind of a little bit more of a time to just relax, do any side tasks you needed to do. And it was a good bonding for the team.
Yes.
I definitely grew a lot closer to my co-workers in Portofino because we had that more time together. During things like when thunderstorms happened, you would get to sit, kind of talk about the plan for when the pool reopened, but also get to learn more about their day-to-day lives too, which was cool.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked enough about that. I want to know, Kirsty, have you had any interesting or funny stories that you could tell when you worked there? Because we know, again, don't want to offend anybody, but the theme park people can be the worst at times.
I have a really funny one. It was not funny at the time, but I laugh about it a lot now. I think everyone who knows about it, who happened at the time, they laugh too, so it's okay to say. I was working a really busy 5th of July shift on my second programme at Portofino. And I was having a good time. It wasn't too busy. It was nothing compared to how busy 4th of July had been. Everyone was lovely. I had no issues with any guests. And I was carrying a massive tray of hot dogs. And I remember this vividly. I was walking and I decided to kind of walk around the path to get to this table they kept changing where they were sitting to eat. So we kept having to move back and forward. And when I went to put the hot dogs down, I slipped because someone left a bag or something on the floor. And I sprained my ankle. So it wasn't too painful. I was running on adrenaline. But I remember watching these hot dogs hit the floor and roll into the pool. And it's one of those ways where it's obviously it's embarrassing that I've fallen over, but just seeing everyone turn to look at these hot dogs. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So that was funny. That was a really good story. I remember when I was telling friends and family, they were like, what? And I was like, yeah. And then the woman, unfortunately, the woman for the family, she took it not great. She asked if I was going to go get another hot dog. And I was kind of like, I'm kind of still lying on the floor, but of course I will. Yeah, I'll go do that.
Wow.
My ankle was sprained, so I didn't get another hot dog. Someone else did. But that was not funny at the time. Hilarious now.
Yeah.
To look back on, I can still picture the moment of the slow motion hot dogs almost rolling into the water. Yeah, and then the other one that we always used to laugh about was on both programs. My name's Kirsty, obviously, but it's not really a standard name you hear that often in the US. So people will always assume my name's Kirsty.
Kirsty, yeah.
So I think I had to get my name tag over my 2 programs reprinted so many times because every time I had to get a new one, because if it faded from the sun, you would have to get a new one.
Right.
I've had ones that say Kirsty, I've had ones that say Christy, ones that said like Scotland but spelt with 2 T's.
What?
Yeah, I've had the funniest name tags. I also, obviously Starbucks is another one. Even when I'm wearing my name tag and I've gone into the Starbucks on site before my shift, they'll still put my name down wrong. I think one time someone put car seat, like a seat in a car. That was hilarious. Acaroy was another one. Instead of Kirsty, they put Acaroy.
What?
I was like, I don't know how they've got that one. It's spelled like A-K-A... What was it? A-K-A-R-O-Y. Like Acaroy. And I was like, oh.
How'd you get that from Kirsty? It's not like your name tag's written, it's printed.
I know, that's the funny part, is it leaves me speechless each time. I was saying to my mum, it's maybe because when someone asks for her name, I'll go, Kirsty? But I'm like, surely you would still think it's not Acaroy. But anyway.
It's not even a name. Anyway, let's put a pin in that one. We're going to delve into that later as well. I'm going to offend some more of our listeners later. Did you get to meet any celebrities when you were there then, Kirsty? Because, they happen to be there, and I'm sure they have to eat while they're there.
Do you know, it's really funny you asked that. I did. My very first day in my very first programme, like I said, Hagrid's was opening. While they were doing the opening ceremony and kind of the Harry Potter stars were going on the ride, Warwick Davis wasn't able to ride Hagrid, so he came over and had his lunch with us at Amatista. Awesome. And he was the loveliest man I think I've ever met in my life.
Did you get him? Did you get his signature? Did you tell me? Are you allowed to ask for pictures?
No. You actually get told that during your orientations. It's a very big thing. Like, you're not really supposed to recognise that a celebrity is a celebrity. If that made sense. Yes. So you're kind of only supposed to address anything they've been in if they up.
Right. So you have to treat them like a normal guest because, I get it.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
I mean, they still get treated a bit more like a VIP, but you're obviously not really supposed to treat them too differently, to the point where they would be like, oh, I'm getting completely different treatment here.
I think he goes a lot because we did an RIP tour last year and we were going into the bar by Lombard's, and one of our group was like, there's Warwick Davis, I've just seen him there. And I saw him, he was just outside Diagon Alley as we were like, so I managed to get a picture from like a million miles away that was all blurry and digital. So I think he goes quite a bit.
Yeah, he was really lovely. I know some of my co-workers that later that evening met Tom Felton as well.
Nice.
And he was supposed to be nice. I also met, I think I kind of came across a lot more, definitely on my second programme. Working at Portofino a lot, if celebs are staying at university, they will tend to be posted at Portofino. Some of them were literally not allowed to talk about at all, even though I don't work there anymore. It was very much like, you'll never talk about this. And I was like, okay. But one of the really cool ones was, the cool part about it was there's a lot of celebrities that aren't big in the UK that I had no idea who they were, and my co-workers would be freaking out.
It's like when, for my age, it's when I see those TikTokers and YouTubers and I have no idea who they are.
Yeah, well, there was a big NFL star, and I'd just been told, oh, he's on the NFL, and I was like, oh, cool, whatever. Like, I'm not a big football fan, I don't really know much about it. And they were like, right, you can go serve him then, because there's no chance you're gonna ask him for a photo or anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I went over, and some of the guys I work with were really like, oh my goodness, and I was like, I do not know who that man is.
Yeah.
And it turns out he was, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's called Rob Gronkowski or something. He's like one of the big tight ends or something in the NFL. Nope. Massive name.
Not a clue.
I had no idea as well. And then I remember when I told some of my friends back home who do like the NFL, they were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that you didn't say hi and all this. And I was like, I had no idea who this poor man was.
Like, that's a weird thing from their perspective. They're like, oh my God, you got to meet him. And you're like, he was just a guy. No.
Yeah, like you could have told me he was like any person on holiday and I would have been like, cool, he was a nice man.
Awesome.
Like, that was it, you know? And then there's obviously, like, you have a couple ones where celebrities will reserve like a cabana for the day and you'll see their name on the list in the morning.
Okay.
And you're like, oh my goodness, but then you don't see them at all. And it's like, oh, okay. But there was a couple like TV talk show hosts, a couple people from like Shark Tank, kind of celebrities that I think a lot of my colleagues knew, but I necessarily didn't know. So Yeah, we had the Jimmy Fallon band, The Roots. They came when I worked at Amatista.
Nice.
I met, I think, 2 or 3 of them. They were so lovely.
Awesome.
So
yeah. That's
quite nice.
Pre-show spiel in that ride by them is the best thing ever.
Yeah, I'm not a massive fan of the ride itself, but I do love the pre-show.
Yeah, I don't mind it. It gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I think we like it. Anyway, each to their own. We kind of talked about this because I want to wrap up now because we've been at it an hour now. But I've really enjoyed it, Kirsty. It's really interesting, like delving into, like I say, a part of the theme parks that people don't talk about a lot, and they should because it's a huge part of it. But we kind of talked about this beforehand, so I don't want you to go into as much depth as you did before because we don't want to get anyone into trouble. But I wondered if, because like you were working technically for Lowe's, but still at Universal Orlando, were you classed as a team member? I think you've kind of already hinted at it by the fact that you had a name badge, which I assume would have been a Universal Orlando team member badge.
Yeah, so the hotels have the name badge is virtually almost the same. They are just a slightly different design based on what hotel you work at, which is quite cool to see.
That's interesting.
But I was a team member, so we got team member IDs, and we had access into the parks and all of the kind of standard team member benefits too, which is great. So
cool. I mean, what's better than getting paid to work at the theme parks, but getting to go in for free as well?
Exactly.
It sounds like the dream.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, Kirsty, it's been awesome to talk to you. I've genuinely really enjoyed it. Again, it's one of those that people don't talk about, and I think I hope listening to this, our listeners go to the theme parks and appreciate all the team members a little bit more because, you know, we're all human. We're all just trying to do our jobs, and you are there to make their day better, and it can have a huge impact on people's experience.
Oh yeah, 100% for sure.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to do what you did, Kirsty, where would they want to go?
Yeah, so I went for a company called Yummy Jobs. Yummy Jobs is an international recruitment company who have these summer work and travel programs. You can head over to the yummyjobs.com website and you can also view the Universal programs. There are 2 at the moment. There's the ability to work for Universal in the parks as food and beverage attendants or park services attendants, or you can work for Amazing Pictures and Colour Vision, who do all of the photography, as photographers and sales associates. So you would head over to yummyjobs.com to find out more about that.
Cool. And of course, we know you're quite prolific on TikTok as well, so I remember having a conversation way back. You got invited to that Music After Dark thing that they did a few years ago as well, didn't you, because of your TikTok?
Yeah, I got in for free to the Maroon 5 Music After Dark, which was such a surreal experience. A really good event, actually. I don't know if I would have paid for it, but absolutely fantastic event, having been gifted it for free. So yeah, I love my Orlando TikToks. I could spend years just making videos of Orlando, for sure. But
where will they find that, Kirsty?
It's just at Kirsty Clyne on all social media handles. So.
That's Kirsty with a K, Clyne with a C, just for anyone who wants to know. And Y, it's a Clyne.
Yeah.
Let's spell it out. So it's KIRSTYCLYNE. Because let's be honest, we don't want Ackroyd. It's not Ackroyd Clyne. Yeah. It's interesting going on just briefly about that after dark thing, that they've never done it since.
Yeah, do you know, I was thinking that the other day because I actually Googled it thinking, I wonder if they did ever do anything with it. But no, just that one.
So I'm wondering if it didn't go down as well as they hoped.
It definitely wasn't overly busy. Like, it was, the whole selling point was that it was going to be intimate, but it was very, very quiet. Especially after that concert kind of finished, a lot of people dropped out. Like, we were on every single ride that was open, walk-ons. Like, every ride, including Gringotts and things like that, which is mad.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Cool. Right. Well, that's going to bring to the end another show. Thanks, everyone, for listening. That will end this podcast. But don't forget, if you're at the parks, try some Freeze Ray Pops and record yourself rating them out of 5 and send them to us at podcast@uuopodcast.com for Which Stick Gets Your Lick. Shoot us your jokes about how bad Fast and Furious is, and you can drop them to that same email. But for now, we will see you back here next week for Tracy and I's audio from our trip to the parks. Bye, everyone.
Are you insane? Get out of here. The curse, it's real. The podcast is over. So, the Magi want you to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, TikTok, and Pinterest. Just search UUO Podcast. For all the podcast news and articles, check out our blog at UUOpodcast.com. Contact us by emailing us at podcast@UUOpodcast.com. And if you want to join the Producers Club, email us at UUOPproducers@gmail.com. Silence! With your subscriptions, we shall rule for all eternity. Listen and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Not even the Magi can save you now. There is no escape. Your end shall be my beginning. Prepare yourself for your next trip by emailing Michelle at portkeyvacations.com. She can take care of all aspects of your next Universal Orlando vacation. We hope you enjoyed your podcast. Please remain seated and keep your arms and legs inside the Prepare to Forfeit Your Souls. Check out the other podcasts on the UUOP network. Rush of Fear Halloween Horror Nights podcast, the theme park duo for all your West Coast news and info, the Taste of Universal, Universal Orlando Food podcast, and the newest podcast on the network, the Portkey Passport, our Disney-centric podcast. So hey, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. I would have enjoyed this podcast a lot more if I had gotten my cup of coffee.